Next on Garden Line, landscaping with native South Dakota grasses.
Indian grass, like all native grasses, are very easy to propagate.
And the Great Bear Recreation Park in Sioux Falls.
What did this area look like when people first came here?
This program is funded in part by Swiftel Communications.
Hello and welcome to Garden Line. I'm Stephen Monk. Tonight on our show, we'll go to a home of a native plant expert at SDSU who will highlight South Dakota native grasses that can be used to decorate your yards and landscapes. And Garden Line travels to Sioux Falls, South Dakota to see how the Parks and Recreation Department is using a vegetative management plan to reclaim the system of trails at Great Bear Recreation Park for native plants and grasses. And as always, our panel of lawn and garden experts will answer your questions. So get ready to call in. Our panelists are here with the most up-to-date information about gardening, lawn care, insects, trees, and a host of other lawn and garden concerns. Joining me in the studio to answer your questions are John Keykafer, Brookings County Extension Educator, David Graper, SDSU Horticulture Department Head and Extension Horticulturalist, Mike Meckning, Extension Weed Specialist, and John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist. The phone number for you to call in with your lawn and garden questions is 1-866-595-SDSU. Once again, that is 1-866-595-7378. Helping to answer the phones tonight are members of the Brookings Master Gardeners. And remember, when you're calling in with your questions, please provide your phone volunteers with as much information as possible about your garden problem. Be ready to provide a description of the problem, when the problem first appeared, whether it's affecting any other surrounding plants, and moisture and or soil conditions that exist around the problem. Now, before we get to our questions, Garden Line paid a visit to the home of Gary Larson, a native plant expert in the biology and microbiology department at SDSU. We learned about several varieties of decorative ornamental grasses native to South Dakota.
Hello, I'm Gary Larson of the Department of Biology and Microbiology at SDSU. We're here today to talk about the use of native plants, or native grasses in particular, in the garden setting. And I've chosen a number of native perennials of our tallgrass prairie region to feature today. We drive by these all the time in roadsides and actually some native prairie parcels that remain. And they tend to go unnoticed, but they can make actually very beautiful specimen plantings as well as borders. The first example that we're going to look at here belongs to the dropseed group. This is prairie dropseed. It's a co-dominant with the tall grasses in native prairie in the eastern part of the state. It's a bunch grass, and that's a very important aspect of this, because when we use native grasses for the landscape, we don't want to use species that are particularly aggressive in the way that they grow. So we tend to want to use native bunch grasses for this purpose. Now, prairie dropseed is very good for that because it does retain its tight growth habit and makes a very nice specimen planting or a border. Next, we're going to look at Indian grass, so we'll go on over to the Indian grass planting. Well, here we're looking at one of the other co-dominant species in the tallgrass prairie. This is Indian grass, which we find flowering now just this late in the season. The color of the panicles is perhaps unsurpassed by any other grass. Now, like all native grasses, these are very easy to propagate. All we have to do is take a piece off of a clump, basically, in the spring of the year and plant it, and typically it will grow from there. Now, these two clumps that I have here were started 4 years ago as offcuts from the base of some Indian grass plantings at the agronomy farm. Here we are in the big blue stem planting in my backyard. We have here 4 clumps that were all made from one that was divided up this spring. Now, there's very little involved in splitting up native grasses to make individual plantings like this. You'd want to do it in the spring of the year before these plants break dormancy, and they will typically break dormancy late May and into spring. Of course, right now we're having the characteristic coloration of big blue stem. This will continue right on into the fall of the year. You'll notice some subtle color changes. They turn the colors that are comparable to some of our showier maples, actually. You get some pretty reds and yellows and oranges with our native prairies, grasses. The other thing we want to consider is how these will look through the winter. These have great standability, and they'll be there for us through the winter landscape. Well, I suggest that everyone consider using native grasses in their landscape if you want to try something unique and different.
All right. Well, we certainly want to thank Gary for that information, because ornamental grasses have really been a hot item in a lot of landscapes and gardens here recently. So we thank him for that. Now, as every week when we have Garden Line, we have our topic of the week for the various areas that our specialists are here to represent. And John, you brought us, and we got 2 Johns again tonight, so I'll try to make sure that John Keycafer or John Ball. But John Keycafer, our entomology man, brought us and it's not a piñata, is it?
Probably be a little more painful than your average piñata. I brought a couple examples along of things that I start getting a lot of calls on at this time of year, and the first one that I'm going to show is actually a paper wasp nest here. These are fairly common. You see them hanging on sides of homes and things. Fairly small. They get up sometimes 5 or 6 inches in diameter, and they'll hang, actually. They'll hang down so that those cells that are open, you'll see the little openings in them, are facing the ground. You'll sometimes see the adult wasps crawling around on those, and fairly common hanging on eaves of houses and things about this time of year. And that's one type of wasp, a paper wasp. They can end up stinging multiple times. They're not like a honeybee in that respect. The other one that I get a lot of calls about, people assume that they have honeybees, are actually yellow jackets. And this is an example of one sort of a nest. They're actually a paper nest, and they're covered with a paper envelope. So if you look, there'll be just a single opening in it. And the rest of it's entirely encased. And inside, if you open it up, it looks very much like the paper wasp nest. You'd have those cells in there. These things get much larger in size. You could have a couple thousand yellow jackets in there. And again, like the paper wasps, they can sting multiple times. So I get questions now about what should we do about them. I'm finding something like this on my house or in the ground. They're coming and going around the edges of my house, something like that. And the response that I usually give is, if you've lived with them this long, try to live with them for a few more weeks. Once it freezes, weather turns cold, they'll all die. They don't overwinter as a nest there, and so you'll be rid of the problem. So wait until they die out and then try to seal up where they were getting in, keep them from getting in future years again. But it's one of those things, if you can just wait them out for a little while now and leave them alone, you really don't have to deal with them.
So John, if you don't do anything with the nest, does that mean that you're going to have them there again next year?
No, they don't reuse the nests at all. They will simply build a new one each year, and so these nests start quite small and grow over the season. So just because you leave them, they're not likely to be back there. But if it was a good spot for them one year, they may build right next to it the next year.
All right, good. Thanks, John. Dave, and by the way, it's really good to see you tonight on our panel to join us.
I've had a lot of people out there sending good wishes and prayers and so forth over the summer. I've had kind of a rough time health-wise, but hopefully I'm on the upward climb here and feeling much better and getting back in the garden and so forth. So I'm glad to be back on the show, at least for this show and the last show of the season. So I want to thank everybody that's been filling in and handling all the horticulture questions. You've done an admirable job, and hopefully I can remember a few answers to a few questions tonight for you. One of the things I want to talk about tonight is it's getting towards the end of the summer. A lot of those summer vegetables are kind of coming to an end. I've heard people saying, well, the tomatoes are still going great guns, or maybe the tomatoes aren't looking so good. The diseases and so forth have kind of filled in and caused problems. But keep out there and keep after getting those tomatoes out. Pull a few weeds around those plants as you're going. My garden went to weeds this summer. I've spread it with Roundup a couple times, but I'm trying to avoid having the weeds for next season, because I do hope to have a garden again next year. But keep after that garden and keep harvesting those things. The winter squash are what are probably just starting to come in now. Had some questions about that. Again, most of those are 110, 120 day varieties. It's take a little while yet before those are fully mature, but you can start sneaking one here and there if you think they might be ripe enough. The other thing I wanted to touch on just briefly is now is a good time to be out there planting grass. And some of you might be sick of grass because you had to mow it 3 or 4 times a week this summer. Maybe not 3 or 4 times a week, but mow it a lot. But now is a good time to get some of those bare patches filled in, work it up a little bit, get that soil loosened up, roughened up a little bit, sprinkle that seed in, rake it again. And then if you happen to have a day where we don't get rain, you might want to do some sprinkling on there to keep that soil moist and get that seed to germinate. That's going to give it time to get a root system established and get some carbohydrate reserves built up before winter sets in.
Okay, good. You mentioned winter squash. And actually now, if I understand this correctly, this is a time where a lot of that flavor and sweetness will be being put in there, so you don't want to harvest too early?
Yep. Wait, if you think you got one that might be ripe, most squashes, you can turn the fruit over and look at the bottom of the fruit where it was sitting on the ground. You should see a different colored spot there. Usually it's yellow or orange. That should be pretty prominent. If you see that and the rind is really hard, then you might want to try sampling one, but I wouldn't go out and wholesale harvest anything yet. Most of them can withstand a light frost. Hopefully that's not going to come for a few weeks yet, but most of them are going to need another week or two before they're going to really be ready for storage.
All right, good. Thanks, Dave. Mike, what do we have for weeds this week?
Well, as Dave mentioned, you might be out there and pulling some weeds. There might be a few of those weeds that can provide you a little snack as you're going. So you want to take a look at some of these. There are some nightshades out there that are ripening, and some of those nightshades you can eat, but some you can't. So you got to be kind of careful. So just kind of talk about some of those nightshades you might be seeing going to maturing out there or going to seed. One of them is eastern black nightshade. Black nightshade has a reputation for being a fairly potent nightshade and can be very toxic, but the blackberries, when they're fully ripened, can be edible. Now, we don't want to overdo it, but there are people that make pies, jellies, muffins, all sorts of things out of the ripe black nightshade berries. So that's one thing, once they get ripe, might be edible. Other nightshade type family species out there, the ground cherries. There's a longleaf ground cherry that you might be seeing around. We've had several questions on this. It gets kind of like a Chinese lantern type berry on it. Those might be edible, but again, only when they're that dark or orange, yellow, when they're fully ripe. When they're green, they can be toxic, so you want to be very careful of some of these things. There's another common ground cherry, clammy ground cherry in South Dakota. This one does not have, or this one has hairs all over the leaves. So that one you might see out there as well. Finally, one of the last nightshades I want to mention is bittersweet nightshade. Now this one is very toxic even when the berries are ripe. They get that bright red color to them. So this one you want to avoid. If you see those growing in your bushes or probably have those red berries right now, you might want to pull them off to prevent some of that seed spread. So watch out for the bittersweet nightshade, but some of the other ones can be edible, but only when they're fully ripe, and always take caution when you're eating some of these weed seeds and things like that, because you never know. But only when they're fully ripe can they be edible.
And you probably should be fairly confident in what it is.
Very confident what it is. Okay. Absolutely, yep.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Yep.
John, what do we have for trees and shrubs tonight?
Well, at this time of year, I start getting lots of calls. The leaves are falling off my crabapple. What am I supposed to do? Nothing. That's the short answer. But, here's a typical crabapple in eastern South Dakota right now. Rather pathetic. A few leaves. The leaves are discolored in that. This is a Dogal crabapple, one you don't want to buy. But I also brought in one that, look at that. There is not a blemished leaf on this plant, and the fruit is very bright, becoming cherry-like. This is the red jewel crabapple. And the point here is that if you're going to go out and buy a crabapple this fall, which is a good time for planting, or next spring, would you make sure you buy a cultivar that is resistant to cedar apple rust and apple scab? If you do that, you don't need to worry about trying to time your sprays, which are near impossible. Instead, you can just sit back, relax, go fishing. and you'll still have nice leaves on it in the fall, and that's a lot better than hauling out the sprayer and spraying at the wrong time and still being left with a bare tree. So if you got an old crabapple like this, whack it and stack it, and go out and buy yourself a red jewel or one of the other newer cultivars that are resistant to these diseases, and enjoy your summer rather than spray your summer away.
Okay, good. Yeah, selecting the right variety can certainly save a lot of labor and expense and time, can it?
Oh, absolutely. You got better things to do with your life.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, panelists. And we're going to get kicked off here right away, right into our questions. So, Dave, we're going to put you on the hot spot right off the bat here. Fern peonies, and this comes from Burke, South Dakota. When is the correct time of the year to transplant her fern peonies, and should she leave the tops on them?
Well, we're actually in the ideal time for transplanting peonies right now. I generally tell people the month of September is probably the best time to do it. And that's not only for the fernleaf peonies, but for the other herbaceous types of peonies as well. The tops are going to be maturing and actually freezing off here in the next month or so. So what I tend to do when I transplant a peony or divide a peony is carefully dig it up. For some of those, they can have a very large, thick, succulent, kind of brittle root system to them, so you got to be a little careful. Start out far enough away from the plant. Break it up into divisions, or if you want to divide or move the whole plant, you can do that too. If you want to cut those stems off several inches above the ground so you got something to hold on to, and also to help keep track of where that plant is, that might facilitate that process. When you replant them, it's very important. You're going to notice that there's going to be some usually big-sized eyes or buds right underneath the soil surface, about an inch down. When you replant them, plant them so those buds are at about that same level, again about an inch below the soil surface. You might want to do a little mulching of them this fall to help get them through that first winter, but after that, they should take off and be there for many years to come.
All right, thank you. And Dave or John Ball here, 2-year-old mock orange, has a 2-year-old mock orange and would like to transplant it. Is this the right time of the year to transplant that? She wants some help make sure that it makes it through the winter.
Where?
This comes from Colton, South Dakota.
Oh, okay, pretty close.
Yeah.
You know, it still has leaves on it, and I'd wait. If she waits till it goes dormant here in about another, 6 weeks at the most, and moves it then, or moves it very early in the spring, that would be best. And given a choice, I'd actually let it stay where it is all winter and move it first thing in the spring. I'll also mention mock orange has a root system like no tomorrow. It is huge compared to other plants, and so just expect when you dig that up, a backhoe might be advised. I mean, it's surprising just how large of a root system it has when you start digging it. But don't worry, they transplant very easily.
So how much of a root mass should she take? Something the size of a basketball, or?
Well, how tall is her plant?
It really didn't say here. As far 2-year-old is all.
So it can't be too big. Yeah, I'd say basketball or beach balls worth of soil. But the point being, you're going to find a lot of roots beyond that. They're fine roots. You can cut them without any problem. But if you say, well, I'm going to dig up the entire root system, it'd be about the size of this table. I mean, it's 6 feet across. It'd be very common with those small plants, surprisingly.
Good. Well, we have you on deck here at home plate, actually, John. Red maple, Watertown. Red maple needs pruning. Small branches and leaves are coming out off the trunk, high up off the ground, I guess, but still on the trunk. Wants to know if she can prune the tree now or wait until it freezes. The tree is 5 years old. It has not turned red yet.
Well, I would wait. First of all, if you're going to, because I had 2 calls today, well, can I prune my tree now? If you're just doing light pruning and removing less than 10%, you can do it just about any time the saw is sharp. But in this case, if they're coming just from the trunk and they're these small, what we call epicormic shoots, I'd really leave those on, surprisingly, till next June. If you remove them during June, they don't come back very quickly. If she were to cut them off now or this fall or next spring, she'll find where she had one of these small shoots coming off the trunk, she may have 3 or 4. So I would probably just wait. If it's a small pencil-like shoots coming out of the stem, wait till June after everything leaves off, then prune those off. In terms of color, she may not have a red maple. Surprisingly, that happens often enough. But the other thing, too, when the trees are young and vigorously growing, sometimes you don't get quite the best fall color. So she might have to wait a couple of years.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know if that was that was as much of a question as it was just describing that it looks like it's not turning color yet, and how that related to pruning. So, color and pruning, no, don't worry about it. Okay. Dave from Dimmock. After it freezes, is it okay to cut off my asparagus ferns?
Yes, and they bring up a very good point. You do want to wait for those asparagus ferns to freeze, because right now those plants are storing up the carbohydrates. They're going to make those nice big fat thumb-sized shoots next spring. So rather than push it, just wait until they freeze, and then you can cut them off right down close to the ground. And if you want, you can even cut them off and just kind of let them lay there. Or if you had a plant that you wanted to put some extra winter protection, you can. I've used them as a little snow fence in my garden for some things that I wanted to get a little snow cover. I just stick them between some little posts, and they act as a nice little wind catcher or snow catcher, and pile up some snow. But wait until they freeze, and that's going to be the best time and the best way to get good shoots next year.
All right. John, well, every week we have calls that come in and emails that come in, and here's a question that came in email-wise, and it's a unique one, and it comes to us from Spearfish. It starts out as, we arrived home tonight to a huge hole in our pine trees. And I think by the hole, they mean hole that branches are gone, not a hole in the trunk per se. It looks or sounds like here the kids nearby decided to make a fort and cut off or twisted off many of the branches from two spruce trees that they have. The damage is 2 trees, up to 5 feet of branches were either cut or twisted off. What can we do to protect the tree from further damage or disease? And will this area fill back in on my spruce trees to where these kids were having fun building their own fort from the branches? So.
Well, of course, everybody's wondering what the first thing you do is turn those kids to mulch, you know, because they're just going to come back. But assuming you can take care of the kids.
20 years old. Yep.
20-year-old kids?
No, the trees.
Well, you know, I figured then alcohol was involved, but 20-year-old trees, the only thing you can do, and I would do it soon, even better, find the kids and make them do it, or get their parents out there, is prune off the branches fairly cleanly to the trunk. On conifers, I wouldn't be too worried about it. But as long as you're removing less than 1/3 of the full crown, in other words, you know, you're removing a bit of it and there's quite a bit above it, it's not going to harm the tree. Unfortunately, with conifers, branches do not grow back, so that hole's going to be there for a long, long time, and you're better just to limb it up and find something to do with those kids.
Dave, this comes from Del Rapids. We want to move our strawberries from the current garden location to raised beds. Can you advise us when the best time is to transplant the strawberries and how to prep the beds?
Well, the prepping is something that Mike can maybe help out with, is getting the weeds controlled in that area first. Weeds in strawberry patch is probably one of the biggest issues that people deal with. As far as timing and when to transplant them, you could transplant them this fall, but you might have some problems with frost heaving if they don't have good snow cover, and if you don't get a good layer of straw on top of them this winter to give them some winter protection. You're probably going to be better off if you can wait till early spring when you just start seeing some of those first leaves coming out. Then you might want to try transplanting them. And perhaps even a better solution is let the old plants where they are, buy brand new plants next spring. There are many good varieties out there, everything from the day neutrals to the summer bearing to the ever bearing. But start out with fresh disease-free plants, because there are a lot of diseases and things that can get into strawberries, and you're just going to perhaps have a very short-lived new bed if you transplant them to a new spot. But get the weeds under control. And then, depending on the site, you might want to do a soil test even yet this fall, till it up good, get some fertilizer mixed in there if you need to, according to that soil test results, and then transplant them in the spring or plant new plants next spring.
Okay. You want to talk about the weeds anymore, Mike?
No, but that's true. I mean, keep in mind, I mean, this is a broadleaf crop, a perennial broadleaf crop. So if you get broadleaf weeds in there, I mean, it's all hand manual labor. I mean, there's nothing really, nothing I can suggest that you can sprinkle on there to take all those weeds away. So. Yeah, starting off clean is key.
Okay, good. This one comes to us from Brookings. For the last several years, they've had problems with leaf spot on their tomato plants. And Dave, we'll send this one to you here. This year was worse than normal, which that's been reinforced by a number of viewers. We rotate as best we can within the limited garden space that we have. We use wire mesh to help support the plants. Would it do any good to spray the wire mesh with some type of chlorine solution to help curb the leaf spot problem? If so, in the spring, fall, or both, question mark. Is there anything else that you would recommend, perhaps, to help curb some of the leaf spot problems they're having with their tomato plants?
Well, certainly we've had ideal conditions for all sorts of foliar and bacterial diseases on tomatoes this year, and a lot of other vegetables as well, with the constant moisture, the high humidity that we've had. And that's really your biggest problem, along with having varieties that seem to be very susceptible. John mentioned using resistant varieties of crabapple to avoid some of the diseases there. Do a little research this winter and see if you can find some varieties that look like they might be good ones for you, that say that they are resistant to septoria leaf spot or early blight or late blight. Those are the three big diseases that we end up with on most tomato problems. So consider trying some different varieties. Don't plant just one, but maybe buy 2 or 3 different plants and try those and see how they do for you. As far as overwintering of the disease organisms, it's mostly on old foliage and stem tissue and so forth that's left in the garden from one year to the next. Now, you might get some of that hung up in some of that mesh that you're using to support the plants. So you might want to just kind of hose that off, get rid of some of that debris. It's mostly going to be what's on the ground. So if you can get that raked up and tilled into the soil this fall so that has a chance to decompose, that's going to be a good help to you. And again, rotate around in the garden, but for people that have a small garden, moving from one side of a 20-foot garden to the other side of a 20-foot garden probably isn't going to do a whole lot of good in the long run. If you run back and forth with a tiller, you've mixed it in and you've got the inoculum there. So I think they're doing a good thing in keeping them up off the ground, get good air circulation around those plants, water from below, and watch for those symptoms to show up early in the season, and then start applying a fungicide as directed on the label for those kinds of diseases. But there's no good, easy answer. When you've got a garden that's loaded with the inoculum, it's pretty tough to get away from it.
All right. John, I'm going to send this your way. Rapid City. Critters in the garden. They're burrowing holes in the garden the size of a silver dollar. And they eat the beet tops and part of the beet that's above the ground. Carrots, kind of the same situation. They don't seem to have a problem with them causing problems with the tomatoes or the peppers. They do have a fence around the garden. They don't think it's a cottontail because of the fence and probably some of the damage, I guess, is what they're surmising there. Could mice be doing this? Any ideas what it could be or what they could do to help curb this?
Yeah, silver dollar size holes are pretty good size holes in a case like this. I would guess it may be one of the ground squirrels rather than mice. Most of the mice are going to go after grain, I think, and pretty well leave a lot of the vegetable crops alone. I'd be looking for some ground squirrels in there, and if you see that your problem just disappears in the next few weeks now, at least temporarily, might be an indication that you've got some ground squirrels in there as well, and they've gone ahead and started hibernating, and you may not see much of them anymore. As far as getting rid of them or trying to control them in a garden like that, you know, trapping is probably going to be about your best method. If you're right in Rapid City, that's going to be about the only one that's available to you, I think, realistically. Otherwise, you could try excluding with some finer fencing, but you want to make sure that you get that fence material buried below the surface of the soil as well to try to keep them out from tunneling in there.
Really buried.
Yeah, well, I was just going to ask how deep is buried?
Yeah, in this case, a couple feet.
Couple feet.
Is what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not just 6 inches down.
Yeah, this
is where you need a cat.
Okay.
Yeah, this isn't like a rabbit where you get it 6 inches below the soil and they stay out of there. This is.
And when you say ground squirrels, some people call it flicker tails or stripe. You see the stripes down their back.
We've got a few different species here. We've got the, some people call them stripy gophers. They're the 13-line ground squirrels. We've got the flicker tails, which are the Richardson's ground squirrels, and then in some places we have Franklin's ground squirrels in South Dakota as well.
Okay, thank you. John Ball, hackberry tree. There's 2 of them, and they are in the Black Hawk area that they planted this spring. Do we need to go and get them ready for winter? They want to know, what can they do to get them ready for winter? They were planted this spring.
Send them to Florida? No, there's actually nothing. They're a very hardy plant. If keep them watered if need be, and no need to fertilize them, and they should go fine. But out where you're at, since sometimes we do have dry winters and warm winters, I would make sure that they have adequate moisture going into winter. Don't worry about overwatering them and having them grow too late into the year. But otherwise, hackberries are pretty good tough trees for that area.
Okay. Dave, this is from Sioux Falls. When is the best time to transplant outdoor ferns? And that's the most description I've got, is just outdoor ferns. There's a little graph on there, but I don't know if that's going to help as much the way they drew it. So, artist rendering, I think.
Yeah, there's lots of outdoor ferns out there. Generally, I think it works better to transplant those in the spring, again, just when things kind of warm up and the soil is workable. If you can mark where they are. Now, some of these ferns, like, say, ostrich ferns and so forth, or cinnamon ferns, they've got a pretty good base to that plant that you're going to be able to figure out where they are. Other ferns pretty much have that all below ground. You can't really see them very easily. So, again, I think spring is probably the best time to do that transplanting. Mark them now so that you know where they're at, so that you can go back and dig them up that next spring. Or if you want to try doing them this fall, I'd say, again, probably during this time, month of September is probably going to be a pretty good time to get them some time to get established. And again, I would suggest mulching that area after the ground is frozen. Put on 2 or 3 inches of mulch over the top of those plants to kind of give them some extra protection this first fall.
Okay. And this would be the case, as you mentioned earlier, if they're going to wait till spring, maybe some weed control
Yep,
to
again,
the new location?
Whenever you're starting a new garden area, that weed-free site, now's the chance that you've got to take care of that. I'm not sure where ferns fall in relation to sensitivity to different kinds of herbicides, but they probably don't like herbicides too much either. So again, clean that area out. If you've got perennial weeds in there, get them sprayed out. Use a non-selective herbicide like glyphosate or something like that. Do some tilling, get that soil worked up, incorporate some organic matter. Ferns generally like organic matter. And keep in mind, don't put them in a real dark, shady spot. People have a misconception that ferns like to grow in the shade, and most ferns actually like to get a little sun. So on the edge of some tree cover or something where they're going to get some sun, maybe some morning sun, probably be a good site for them.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dave. So, well, recently, Garden Line traveled to Sioux Falls, South Dakota to see the Great Bear Recreation Park is more than just a recreation winter destination. Most of Great Bear is situated on the hills northeast of Sioux Falls that slope towards the Big Sioux River. The highly dissected hills support grassland and a predominantly bur oak forest. Now, the Sioux Falls Parks and Recreation Department is using a vegetative management plan to reclaim the 273-acre park from invasive non-native species. After 3 years of work, the area's horticulture diversity reflects a wildlife-friendly, short grass and tall grass prairie. Lauren Beard, the district park supervisor for Great Bear, and Matt Hart, a park service worker, both of whom happen to be SDSU alumni, detailed the park's transformation for us.
Every time I come up here, it's something new every time. I love this stuff.
One of the primary goals was to get people back to nature. A trail system was planned, and the goal was to help reestablish or encourage natives, grasses and plants to come back on the property. What did this area look like when people first came here? What was it? And once you start seeing that, you can imagine this going on for miles and miles and miles. Matt Hart, Mike Fries are out here, are 2 full-time employees, not only for Great Bear, but a number of other parks, but really leading the charge on the vegetative management plan and achieving great results for us.
I came to Great Bear 3 years ago, and I was introduced to the vegetative management plan, and I looked through it and I said, oh, this is great. Now take me out and show me where those areas are. And so the caretaker at the time took me on a tour, and when we got to the top of these areas, we got up here and I thought, oh man, where are we going to start? There was all kinds of brome, some thistles, leafy spurge all over the place.
A not very desirable situation for us. Not much diversity, not much interest for the visitor.
The first step of our process was to mow all these areas down, clear the ground up so we can get a plateau application, an herbicide, that suppressed the brome and other tame grasses in these areas. And that allowed reduce the competition for the natives, and they just kept coming up thicker year after year, and we would continue with the mowing process to replace essentially the grazing like the bison used to do. And the grass responds real well to that, and we'd come back after in a couple of years, and it would be thick, and it would take care of itself after that.
And that's what Mike and Matt have been doing, is targeting areas and helping bring about this transformation.
We have lots of big blue stem, as you can see behind me here. Little blue stem right in front of that. Side oats grama, Indian grass, all kinds of grasses. I mean, it's definitely not a monoculture. You can see on one side of the fence, where it's privately owned and no management has taken place. You can see some remnant plants there, but they don't have much of a chance. But then you look on our side of the fence where we have mowed and sprayed and controlled the invasives, and they have really responded well, and you get what you see. Lead plant was the coolest one in there. It's, you know, lead plant has always been kind of an indicator of prairie health. And in that spot right there, it was just thick. And you can tell it's really doing well there. And once that starts to seed out, the tall grass comes up, and that starts to take over now, and it'll repeat the cycle all again next spring.
Thanks to their efforts, have really brought about the vision that we originally had. In fact, in a lot of places, they've exceeded that vision. We get a large population of deer coming in, more turkeys, pheasants. So what the visitor is seeing is a lot more wildlife on site, and much more easily.
It's definitely aesthetically pleasing. I mean, this is beautiful. We're starting to get into the time now where they're turning into their purple hues and stuff like that. And you can come through here. You could be walking down this trail right here, and a deer might step right out in front of you and look at you and just keep walking across the trail into the cover. I mean, that can happen with anything. As you're out here, you never know what you're going to see. That's the beautiful part of it.
For me, who I previously worked for game fish and parks and was very much in tune with environments like this, this is like going home. This is terrific, phenomenal for wildlife, tremendous for the park visitor.
Well, we want to thank Lauren and Matt for sharing what their efforts are there in Sioux Falls and the positive results that are coming from that. So if we have a chance sometime, we head down there and take a look at that ourselves. So thank you again.
We do research down there with those guys on some of the tough weed species they're dealing with, and yeah, it's just beautiful. The trails are great. If you live in the Sioux Falls area, go out Great Bear, go out those woodland trails. It's fantastic.
Good. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we get emails that come in of questions, and we have some graphics too that came in that we're going to start with now. And this one comes to us from Lennox, and it would be graphic 1 and 2. There are 2 photographs of a young maple tree on the edge of their lawn. Over the past summer, it has become surrounded by creeping Charlie. How can I take care of the creeping Charlie without hurting my tree? Can I spray the weeds once, the leaves are off the tree, or can I spray after it has changed color? Or is it a case where I pull out every single weed by hand? So, advice there, Mike?
Yeah, it's a tough situation, as the viewer has indicated. But yeah, at the state fair this year, we had a booth, a lot of questions on creeping Charlie. Crabgrass was the biggest one, but I also wanted to thank everybody for coming out to the state fair and visiting our booth. That was a lot of viewers out there this past week. But yeah, it's in a difficult situation there next to that young tree, and as the viewer is kind of indicating, a little hesitant about spraying herbicide around there, because really you need to spray a herbicide for creeping Charlie or ground ivy that has dicamba in it, and the drawback of dicamba is that it can get down in the root zone, and those tree roots can take up that herbicide and it can injure those tree leaves. So you want to be very careful using herbicides in a situation like that, especially ones that have dicamba. And as the viewer indicated, one possible way of minimizing the potential for injury is to spray later in the fall as those leaves are turning, and be very careful of your rate. Normally we might suggest spraying maybe twice in the fall for creeping Charlie control, but in this situation with that small tree, twice is probably going to be too much. So you might be able to get away with one application later in the fall as those leaves are turning. That'll help minimize injury to those tree leaves. Also, make sure you're calibrating. Make sure you're measuring that herbicide, and make sure you calibrate your sprayer. And a lot of people think, how on earth do I calibrate a little wand sprayer? You'd be surprised. It's fairly easy. Just mark out an area, 1,000 square feet, and figure out how much water do you normally spray in 1,000 square feet. Don't spray any herbicide. Just spray water and to see. All the herbicide labels will say something like 2 ounces per gallon per 1,000 square feet. You might just put in 2 ounces per gallon and off you go, but the key is how much water do you put out per 1,000 square feet, and use 2 ounces of herbicide for how much water you use in that 1,000 square feet. So it's not too hard. Once you get yourself calibrated, you're pretty good to go. I think a lot of problems with our weed control on lawns are due to miscalibration and things like that. So yeah, this is a very difficult situation. Want to be careful. You know, you're going to be looking at a light management. It's going to take you a few more years, but there are some things you might be able to do.
Now, John, we noticed in the graphic that they had grass right up next to the trunk. Is there some things mulch-wise they can do so they're not right next to that tree?
I would do that. You know, if they could get 2 feet of mulch as a radius around it, 4-foot circle, that's going to take care of most of the root system of that small tree. The roots are growing out further, but I'd be concerned about the dicamba right at the base, not 3 feet out. And so if they just replace that with mulch, first of all, the tree's going to do better for it, cooler, moisture environment, and it's going to reduce putting down a weed control where it could actually be damaging to the plant.
Okay. So how tough a weed is that? What should they do for mulch? So is that
well, they're still going to have to deal
right up through it, or what?
Oh heck yeah! I mean that'll go right through it like no tomorrow. But if they can control it, and quite honestly, if they have the mulch there, and during the summer they spray a little Roundup on the mulch carefully, still day, you know that, they'll kill it, I'm assuming, and it's not going to damage a tree if as long as they're applying it on top of the surface.
On the mulch.
Yeah.
Or they may just want to, when they're putting that mulch on, just kind of dig out that spot. I mean, Creeping Charlie doesn't have deep roots. It kind of spreads like a strawberry plant above the soil surface. So it would be fairly easy to just kind of dig it out and remove it from that area.
But not too deep.
No,
for the trees.
Right. Yeah. Just scrape the soil surface.
So that's his point. I mean, you just have to. You don't have to go down with that shovel and say we're going to do 2 feet of soil. You can almost just scrape it out. Okay. Do that. Put down a mulch. You treat the mulch with a little Roundup as needed next summer. Take care of the weed problem. You can probably have both.
Okay.
But it's a good point that John's making. I mean, those small trees with that thin bark, we really have to watch about getting herbicide, even Roundup, on that thin bark, because that can be taken up by the tree and cause serious damage.
Well, with the Roundup product, if they just hold a piece of cardboard against the trunk and make sure that you don't get spray on it, would that?
That would do it, or you know, if they had a lot, those wick applicators are kind of nice, you know, because then you don't have really any drift. But he's right. If the bark is still green, then it's going to take it up. And I've seen small trees, newly planted trees, injured by Roundup applications.
Okay, good. This one comes to us from Mitchell, and this is graphic number 3. I've tried, I'm so tired of trying to grow potatoes. It seems as if they never grow normal. Most of them have several potatoes growing one another. The one on the right was gnawed on by something big and then bruised over again by the potato skin. I think it was just kind of grew over. The one on the right also has these sorts of white spidery web sort of hairs on it. What can I do to grow normal potatoes?
Well, I'm not sure about the white spidery webs, but that sounds like it's the mycelium of a fungus of some sort. I'm not sure exactly which one that would be. But one issue that I think it might be applying in this situation is potatoes will kind of start setting tubers, and then if it gets real dry, they kind of stop, and then you get water again. They can start growing a secondary part to that tuber. So what I would suggest is try planting some different varieties. I'm not sure exactly which variety that was. It's a white potato of some sort, obviously. But again, try a little variety. Try 2 or 3 different kinds of potatoes. Some of them you might find in your garden, in your soil, works better than others. Mounding that soil up or hilling that soil up over the plants once they get established in the summer is going to help to give you a better place for those potatoes to grow. Applying some mulch over the top is also going to help to even out that moisture and hopefully reduce some of that secondary tuber development that we might see with some of those potatoes. So again, try some different things going on there. Again, it's hard to give you a real good answer as to what's going to make perfect tomato or potatoes, but try some different things and see what happens.
Okay. John, any idea what might be causing the physical damage on this?
I was afraid you were going to ask me that. Probably mammal, just based on the size of it. My first instinct would be woodchuck or maybe one of the ground squirrels again, but without having some evidence of it, seeing an animal in there or something, I think it'd be pretty hard to tell.
Now, didn't you several weeks ago talk about growing potatoes? I swear it was a trash can.
That wasn't me. I think that might have been Jerry Mills.
Because it sounded like an interesting way of doing it that would avoid some of these problems.
Yep.
Dave, do you know about that, growing them in a trash can?
I've not heard about growing them in a trash can, but I've heard of growing them in the compost pile or growing them in a straw pile. so that the stolons actually spread out in that straw and reduce the tubers.
This was, they put them in a trash can and then they keep putting layers on.
I think we had a call actually that came in. Somebody had, the neighbors had started them in a trash can and then had given them to them. I wondered how they moved those trash cans full of soil. But then I think it was Jerry was talking about that you can grow them in tires that way and just stack tires up and fill them with soil. And then when you're ready to harvest, you just knock the layers of tires off.
Yeah, I mean, it gets it raised, better drainage. It improves a lot of things. Trash can, I don't remember we made the joke, don't have the trash cans out when they pick up the garbage, otherwise your potato production may.
Well, and one of those methods would almost certainly keep those mammals away from this as well.
Yeah, try the tires, that sounds good.
So grubs-wise, probably not?
Probably not an insect issue in this case. There are some insects that can get in there, but not real common around here. This is probably a mammal.
Could be my basset hound. She likes to eat our potatoes if she gets a chance.
Okay. Now, graphic 4 and 5 comes from Rapid City, and they had this plant show up in their garden about 2 months ago. I think it is a weed, but I'm not sure. My wife and I decided to let it grow to see what it turns out to be. It has these tiny fruit-looking things on it. It is the only one of its kind in the garden or yard. Did we make a mistake by letting it grow? Any ideas or your thoughts on this?
Boy, yeah, I don't know if we have another picture here.
You've got one, yeah, it shows, I think, some of the fruit on it. But.
Okay, yeah, I'm just right off the top of my head, and we were kind of looking at the picture before the program started. I can't really tell for sure. We talked about nightshades early on, and we were kind of thinking this is a plant in the nightshade family. The berries, very similar to a lot of plants in that family. That's a weedy family, and so this could be something that could be a weed, but we'd have to identify it for sure to know much about that. So, boy, you're on your own as far as right now. Just kind of keep an eye on it. You know, as Dave mentioned early on, I mean, it's only a weed if you don't like it, and so if you don't mind it there, have fun with it, but you might want to just kind of keep it in check. It's a fairly large seeded berry. They're kind of fairly large seeds, so this population isn't going to explode overnight, so it's not something you have to get too concerned about anyway.
So that's something that if they would like, they could take into the local extension office and
that's right.
Have that sent to you?
Get a better, yeah, we could get a better ID that way.
All right.
But likely some sort of nightshade species.
All right. Okay, thank you. Earlier, we had Gary talk about some of the ornamental grasses on his program. The question that came in here from Lead is, any idea where they could buy or get seed that for some of those grasses?
Well, you know,
or maybe even plugs. I don't know how that.
You can buy a lot of the grasses just as #1 containers, small containers, and there's wholesale nurseries that grow those and carry those that do provide them to the local garden centers, and it's always nice to shop local. And there are a number of nice garden centers out where they're at. And I would just go to the garden center and say, look, these are the grasses that I'm looking at buying. They may not have some of them on hand, but their suppliers could get them for them. So that would be really my first choice. The other thing, too, is sometimes the local garden center might say, well, yeah, that's a good one for Gary and Brookings, but it's not going to do well here. So they can take advantage of their expertise as well. Dave?
Well, I agree. I'd stick with your local garden centers first. They're going to probably have a lot of these in stock, and there are many others that are out there. Gary showed you some really good common plants that do very well in this area and that have good ornamental characteristics to them. But check there first. You can get seed if you want to do the seed route. If you look online, you can probably find the source of seed for many of those. And again, there's a lot of selections of many of those types of plants. And oftentimes you're going to try to find a selection that's from this part of the country. You'll find stuff that's selected from other areas of the prairie and that may not do as well for you as in here in South Dakota. But it's going to take some time. If you're going to try to grow those from seed, you can start the seed yourself indoors, start it probably in February or March, and then you'll have those little plants that you can put out there, but it's going to be a slow process. Better off starting with some containers that are going to give you some instant show.
All right. Okay. This is from Arlington, fernleaf peony, Dave. She has some fernleaf peony roots, wants to know if she can mail it to her friend in Washington State and how to package that up.
Well, the main thing with the fernleaf peonies, again, is they have a fairly large root system, so it's not a lot of real fine roots. They're going to tend to dry out, but you're not going to want this to desiccate, so I would carefully make the divisions, probably cut the stems down just above those buds or eyes that I talked about earlier. and then wrap it in like shredded newspaper or something like that to give it some padding, because again, they are fairly brittle. I wouldn't put a lot of moisture in there, maybe just a little bit of moisture in there to keep it from drying out, but if you just use like shredded newspaper, that's going to probably work as a good cushion for it, but also retain some of that moisture. Put them in a plastic bag with some holes cut in it, put it in a cardboard box to keep it from getting crushed, and send it out in the mail. If you can do a shorter term delivery instead of something that might take a week to get there, if you can get there in 2 or 3 days, that probably will be better off.
Okay. Is there any regulatory things that she needs to be concerned about, or?
That's what I was wondering, because there's so many trees nowadays, walnuts and that there's no way you
want them to be moved in.
So that would be probably contact their local Department of Ag in that state and see
if that's going to be an issue. Okay. I don't know that there's any problems with fernleaf peonies anywhere, but that's a good point.
Okay. Sioux Falls, John Kiekefer, they had a commercial lawn care treat several times for grubs in their yard. However, the problem still seems to persist. Is there anything she can do now or next spring to help control grubs in her lawn?
Yeah, this is one of those that comes up every once in a while. First thing that I would do in a case like this is I'd want to verify that you have grubs in that lawn and that there's nothing else going on. In this case, what it's going to mean is maybe going out and digging some of that up and just take a look. See if you can actually find those grubs under that sod layer on there. Usually if it is grubs, that sod will almost kind of peel up and you can just kind of roll it back and you'll find those white grubs usually within the top few inches of that soil. You may have to dig down just a little bit. If you are finding white grubs in there, then that's the problem. If you're not, consider a soil test, look for other things that might be doing it. If you do find the white grubs, I would try talking to that whatever company you're using first of all and tell them that whatever they've been applying hasn't been doing the job. See if you can work with them and try to make some arrangements that maybe they switch chemicals or switch treatment time, something like that to correct that problem for you.
All right. Mike, a couple questions here for you. First one is from Geddes. They have a large lot that has a lot of foxtail crabgrass on it. Would it be beneficial to spray it now or let the frost kill it and work on it next spring?
Yeah, this was one of the most common questions at the State Fair. People want to spray that crabgrass now. It's been ticking them off all summer, and they want to do something to it, to hurt it at least a little bit. But unfortunately, you can't do anything because it's an annual grass, and it's at the end of its life cycle, so it's dying anyway. So nothing you can do now. But all those annual grasses can kind of be treated the same. Next spring, early next spring, you can put on like a crabgrass preventer. Those crabgrass preventers will also have activity on the annual foxtails and other annual grasses. So that might help there. You're going to want to put the crabgrass preventer on last week of April, first week of May, or by the time the lilacs begin to start blooming. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. So that's a good time. Put it crabgrass preventer on next spring, and that should help alleviate a lot of those problems.
Okay, the second one I have here. Whoop, go ahead.
I was just going to say, is it a good idea just to kind of try to make sure you keep it mowed to keep some of that seed from maturing and reducing the seed bank for next year?
Yeah, a lot of people have had some good luck with that, where they just collect those seed clippings now to prevent those seed clippings. Collect them, remove them from the lawn, rather than just returning them back to the lawn. I mean, normally we like to return our clippings back into the yard, but now you might want to, for a couple clippings here, remove that seed.
Okay. The second one here is from Salem. She sprayed Roundup on the cracks of her brick patio this fall. Now, is it going to prevent any weeds, crabgrass from that will come up next spring?
No, and that's another question we get quite a bit. No, Roundup, once it hits the soil, or glyphosate, once it hits the soil, it binds very tightly to that soil and then begins to break down. So it will have no activity. Plants cannot take it up once it's in the soil. So maybe in your garden, if you have perennials invading your garden, once your garden is done this fall, late this fall, you could go after those perennials with something like glyphosate or Roundup to help control those for next year. And that Roundup in the soil will have no activity on your plants next year. So.
Does that bind up in the soil right away?
Yes, it does. Now, one thing I want to mention, though, there are Roundups, they'll say Roundup for extended control, and those have Roundup plus something else in them. And so those we want to be careful of, because those will have extended activity. And the problem, especially with like a brick patio, is they can wash into your lawn and kill the grass along that cement or brick area. So sometimes we want to watch out for that Roundup with extended control. A lot of times you don't really need that. Just a regular old Roundup can work just fine.
Okay. Dave, Poppies from Valentine, Nebraska wants to know if this is a good time of year to transplant orange ornamental poppies, or if not, what is the best time?
Actually, generally August or September is a good time. Sometimes they will go dormant late in the summer. Typically when it gets hot and dry. This year they probably still have some foliage on them, but it's a good time to do that transplanting. Again, try to get as much of that root system as you can when you move those plants. Put them in a good sunny location, and you should have poppies there next year.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much for that, Dave. So, and do they need to mulch at all?
Again, mulch, whenever you transplant herbaceous perennials in the fall, a little mulch isn't a bad idea. The earlier you're doing it, the less you're going to need the mulch. If it gets too much, late in the season, then really mulch is important.
All right, good. Thank you. Well, and that's all the time we have for this evening. And just to let you know, Garden Line does repeat twice each week on South Dakota Public Broadcasting Digital Channel 3, which is also known as the Create Channel. The encore broadcast can be seen Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central. Check your local listings to find SDPB Digital Channel 3 where you live. Now time to wrap up. Thanks to our panel of experts, John Keykafer, Brookings County Extension Educator, David Graper, SDSU Horticulture Department Head and Extension Horticulturalist, Mike Meckning, Extension Weed Specialist, and John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist. Thanks to our phone volunteers, the Brookings Master Gardeners, and thanks to you for watching and calling in. Have a good evening and happy gardening.
Funded in part by Swiftel Communications.